Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and apologies we're a few minutes late getting started. We just wanted to make sure that everyone had the chance to join the webinar, so we wanted to make sure those last few people were able to attend. My name's Liam, I'm the MBA Recruitment Manager for the Americas. I'm joined today by my colleague Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Kelshiker and I'm one of the MBA Admissions Advisors here at Oxford Said.
So thank you very much for dialing in today, guys. If you can just do a very quick check that everyone can hear us okay. If you can just very quickly drop a message into the question box saying, yes, we can hear, or if you have any problems, then please do let us know. Okay, I think everyone seems to be, okay, perfect. Thank you very much for confirming. All right, so thank you for coming. This is a webinar around general application tips and how to strengthen your application should you be looking to make one in the next few weeks or over the next few months. We're going to make a start with a slide that looks a little bit like what you might expect to see if you were to Google image Oxford, or if you had a picture postcard, then this would be a landscape that would be quite common to you. This shows a little bit of the architecture around the wider city, the wider university, shows some of the buildings that you'll be walking around, maybe a college that you'll be a member of, and shows somewhat of the tradition of the wider University of Oxford that you will be a member of should you come and study for the MBA at the business school. The business school itself is a lot more modern. It's a lot more recently built. This will be your home away from home during your working day. Your lectures, your seminars, your study groups. If you want to go to the library, they'll will all be on site here at the business school. And the other half of your day where you eat, sleep, socialize, maybe join a sports team or a society will be in the wider college network. We can talk a little bit more about that if anyone has any questions around the colleges a little bit later. With regards to questions, guys, if you have them, please type them in the box as they come to you. If they're relevant to the slide that we're on, we'll address them then and there. But we will have plenty of time also towards the end where we'll have a large question and answer section where Charlotte and I will be answering the questions as they come in. So if we don't get to them straight away, we'll get to them towards the end, but please do send them through as and when you have them. Looking at the class profile, this is some general statistics, looking at maybe averages over the last few years. The class size will often be around the 320 to 330 members mark. It's very international, up to 60 nationalities. The most recent class this year has 92% international students. So if you're thinking of applying for an MBA where building a global network is one of your motivating factors, somewhere like Oxford could be a home where you would find that ability to do that and feel very comfortable doing that. We are around 40% female participants year on year. That can fluctuate a little bit, as can the class size. That's what we're aiming for, and that's what we've recently been able to achieve. Our students often have around 5 years work experience. People join us at different stages in their career. Some are a couple of years in, looking to accelerate. Some are 5 to 10 years into their career and looking to make a change. So if you're sat there thinking, does my career profile fit with what Oxford is looking for? There's a very good chance that it will, but we can talk a little bit more about how you can build a compelling career vision in your application a little bit later. We have a question that's just come in about the 92% international, and is it mostly European? No, the majority of our international students come from Asia as a whole and North America, so the US and Canada. The European students, including the UK as a European student, is roughly about 13 to 15% of this year's class. And that, again, will vary from year on year, but it's certainly not a majority. The average GMAT score for an existing candidate, or an average candidate, I should say, is around a 690. We'll talk a little bit about GMAT scores in a few slides' time. That is where we're coming out on average at the moment. Looking about the application requirements, and this is the slide we'll probably start to go into a lot more detail. So if you have any questions about these, then please feel free to send them through. We would expect that everybody would have an undergraduate degree. It doesn't make too much difference what field of study you've chosen for your undergraduate degree. I do have a lot of questions from candidates that I meet saying, does it have to be one of those traditional business subjects? And no, it doesn't have to be at all. The overall piece of advice that I would give is that your undergraduate degree, along with your career experience and the one-year MBA, should all link together for your future career goals. We're very happy to share that we have a wide range of backgrounds when it comes to candidates onto the MBA. It's not just international diversity that we are very strong in, also experientially, we're very diverse as well. So your class will be filled with more of those traditional people from finance or from consulting, but also people that work in nonprofit, work in healthcare. There might be an engineer. We have some people working in hospitality, people that work for the UN and those large organizations as well. So it is a very diverse mix, and your field of study for your undergraduate degree isn't the most important thing when it comes to whether or not it's one of those traditional business areas. Charlotte, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for those of you who may be wondering what classification of degree or what kind of academic performance we're interested in, rule of thumb, broadly speaking, we're looking for a UK upper second class honours or the international equivalent. So we're not saying that you absolutely need to have, for example, first class degree at undergraduate level, because this is an MBA and thereby a more vocational master's degree than a traditional, very academic taught master's. We are not going to insist that you graduated from university, which, let's face it, might be 5 or 6 years ago, with first class honours. The rest of your application, the rest of your profile will certainly balance out potentially any slight academic underperformance. So generally speaking, we're looking for a UK 2-1 or the international equivalent.
Thank you. Moving on to professional experience, we had a few questions about what does that 5 years of average professional experience look like. It's not easy to put into words one particular profile. What I would say is that it's nice to see some level of growth and responsibilities throughout your time in your career so far. That doesn't have to be a tangible promotion or managing a team or managing headcount, but just how have your responsibilities grown? How have you taken on more of those responsibilities as you've moved through your career? Again, if you're looking to make a change in your career, to pivot to something new, we'll look at your experience so far, we'll look at the one-year MBA, and we'll look at how we can help you achieve the goals that you're trying to do in your post-MBA career. If you're looking to accelerate or even return to the same company or return to a family business, then your professional experience obviously will be very, very important to be able to make that transition back to where you've been before. So there isn't really one particular set answer that I would say your career experience must look like this. The overall piece of advice that I would always give is, does it make sense alongside an MBA with regards to what your career goals are? And that is a very personal thing to you, and so there isn't really one fixed answer that I can give. We do ask for a minimum of 2 years full-time paid work experience. If you're thinking about including internships or volunteer work, sadly, they do not count towards the 2-year requirement. But at the same time, we do look at everyone's application in a very holistic way. And so if you think that you have 2 years worth of experience that you did maybe before you even went to college for the first time, then that will count. If you took a break in your education, worked for a few years, and then went back to complete your undergraduate degree, that will also count. So it doesn't have to be in that typical progression where you finished school, you went to university, you then went into the workplace, and now you're applying for the MBA. There are lots of different backgrounds and different paths that people have taken. So please don't think that your personal circumstance would automatically preclude you from making an application to the school. Charlotte.
Yeah, I think they're really wise words, Liam. What I'd add to that is that should you make an application and be shortlisted for interview, work experience is something that you will be drawing upon a lot to answer our questions when we have that interview conversation. So that's why I think some kind of progression, some kind of depth of experience is really useful. It also means that if you are admitted and you're here in the classroom, you have a richer story to tell, because as well as learning as an MBA student, you're also here to share. Actually, just while we're on this slide, someone has asked a question about the undergraduate degree international equivalent. So if I may, I'm just going to address that question. Someone asking about the equivalent of a UK 2-1 with regards to the US grading structure. So if you're talking about a GPA that's scored out of 4, we would be looking for a minimum of 3.5. That would put you in a position to submit an application to the program.
For nationalities that have a different scoring system for their undergraduate degree, if you want to reach out and let us know what you've achieved, we can very happily convert that for you. We'll do that automatically when you make your application, so the onus isn't necessarily on you to provide the UK equivalent on your application materials. We can do that on your behalf when you make the application. So moving on to the next section, which is the GMAT or the GRE score. The first thing I would say here is that we don't really have a preference. We accept both. Both are equally valuable. The advertised minimum GMAT score on the website you'll find is 650. You saw on the slide previous to this that the average is around about 690. GRE, we don't really have an average, so to speak. It's taken by fewer people. GMAT is probably still a bit more popular when it comes to the candidates that we receive applications from. We do say as a minimum for the GRE, maybe a 160 in the verbal side and a 161 in the quant, and that will give you the equivalent of a 650 GMAT. Now, as with all of our application components, the GMAT or the GRE is just one of the many things that we look at. And so, although it's a very important part of your application, it will not on its own make or break your application. It will not be the reason you are successful. It will not be the reason that you are unsuccessful on its own. So if you're sat there thinking, I don't have the 650 or the equivalent GRE, or I'm struggling to achieve that kind of score, then please don't worry too much. That word holistic again comes into this conversation, where we'll look at other aspects of your application to really see where the strengths are in that and see what you can bring to the cohort. I would suggest that if you have the time and you're thinking about, do I submit my application or do I maybe take the GMAT one more time to try and up your score, my advice would always be try and get the highest score you possibly can. It's a competitive program to get into, and the GMAT and the GRE is a big part of that, amongst other things. And so there's a decision there, I think, for a lot of people to apply maybe in stage 1 versus stage 2 and give themselves a bit more time to try and up the score on the GMAT or the GRE test itself. Charlotte, do you have anything to add on this section?
No, again, really great guidance. And I think what we're looking for in the GRE or the GMAT is a really nice balanced performance. We're looking for a scorecard that really reflects good, solid, all-around ability. So if you are extremely strong quanti, but your verbal score is very weak, that's not necessarily going to help your application. As Liam said, it is only one aspect of your application, but if that's the kind of score that you receive, then I think absolutely right, go again, retake, see if you can just balance out that scorecard a little bit so that we can see a nice solid performance across the board. And just on a sort of more administrative note, when you take the GRE or the GMAT, you can name up to 5 institutions that you would like to share your official scores with. So please make sure that you choose us as one of those receiving institutions. When you make your application, you will need to not only complete the form to tell us what your scores are, but you'll also be directed to your application portal where you have to upload your copy of your provisional test results. So A, make sure you do that, and B, when we then need to verify your scores, we can only do that if you have named us as one of your preferred institutions. So please make sure you do.
We've had a couple of questions that have come in talking about the possibility of other things replacing the need for a GMAT. Somebody mentioned, if I have a master's degree, do I still need to do the GMAT? And the answer is yes, the GMAT is a mandatory part of your application. So the GMAT or the GRE is always needed. I would very strongly recommend that you apply once you have the score. Don't try and apply without it, because if your application is incomplete for any reason, if anything is missing, we're more likely to get in touch and say there are these things that are missing from your application. We will include you in the next round of applications. So please ensure that every aspect is complete before you submit, and the GMAT certainly is always necessary to be able to do that.
I'll just come in at that point. Liam's absolutely right. Great guidance. There is a whole host of materials that we need to support your application that we're taking you through right now. And you need to remember that the admissions committee are not even going to see your application unless it is complete. So you need to provide all the test scores that are required. You need to upload all of the materials, make documents available to us if you want to ensure that when the deadline passes, your application comes through and can be assessed by the admissions committee.
Just one final question we had on the GMAT. The question is, are we more concerned with the percentile that you fall into, or the hard score itself, that advertised 650, for example? I would say the headline score is probably what attracts our attention first and foremost. We'll look at your GMAT in a number of different ways for a number of different reasons. If, for example, you're looking to forge a career in an industry or in a job role that is very quant heavy, such as investment banking, private equity, those kind of areas, we will look at your headline score and think, is this the kind of score that we would expect to see from somebody who would make that transition or that step a successful one? If you're looking to work for a company such as the McKinseys of this world, that are, when they come to hiring MBA graduates, they themselves have minimum GMAT requirements that they look for in the staff that they hire. We'll look through their eyes almost when we look at your application, if that's your stated career goal, and think to ourselves, does this person have the academic scores to be able to be attractive to the McKinseys of this world? So it's a very good question. Percentile is important. Headline score is also important, but it really, again, comes down to that holistic view. What are you looking to do? What are you looking to forge your career in? And how does your GMAT set you up to succeed in that path? I had a question about the GPA. Is a 3.5 minimum a hard, fast, concrete requirement? Just quickly, I think Charlotte has something to add here as well. I would say that no, it's not. We recognize that for some applicants, the undergraduate years were several years ago, and you're a different person now than you were then. You've progressed in your career. There may be external factors that contributed towards a slightly lower GPA than you would have hoped in maybe your freshman year, for example. And so while we have minimum advertised requirements for those academic scores, the 3.5 GPA, the 650 GMAT, I would say that actually none of those are strictly set in stone, because we will look at your application as a sum of its parts, as a whole, rather than individual components.
Yeah,
Charlotte?
I think that's really reasonable advice. It's not, when we're looking at applications and we're looking in the admissions committee, making that initial decision about whether we want to meet you at interview, for example, we're not literally going to put you in a pile of reject if you have under a 3.5 or a 2.1 in your undergraduate degree. What we're trying to do today, I think, is really set you up to understand the kind of academic performance that we are looking for ideally. Now, if your GPA is slightly below that, or maybe it's more substantially below, but you have a very stellar performance in your GMAT, let's say, for example, and your degree was 6 years ago, but your GMAT was last month, then clearly your GMAT is going to be much more indicative of your current ability than your undergraduate degree, for example, as Liam was explaining. So it really is, it's a guide, just to be, I think, fair to you as a candidate as well. If you are applying with, let's say, a third-class degree or the equivalent and a very poor GMAT or GRE, then your application is going to be at a serious disadvantage, and I think it's only fair to say that. But if you are sitting there with an underperformance in your undergraduate degree, but a really, really strong showing in your standardized test, so in your GRE or GMAT, and the rest of your application is really compelling, some great experience, very realistic career aim, very well developed network, and some really interesting, intriguing, well put together essays, then couple that with some supportive references and you could very well find yourself with an offer of admission.
So moving on to the essay section of the application requirement, we have 2 essays in this year's application window. One of them is 500 words, the second one is 250 words. You can see those essay prompts online, but just for ease of clarification, the first one talks about a statistic or a trend that shocks you and how you might use an MBA to address or reverse that trend. And the second essay talks a little bit about, is there anything that you would like to tell us that we can't find in your application materials? Basically, tell us something that we don't already know about you. A big piece of advice that we like to give is to make yourself unique, set yourself apart from the crowd. We have a number of applications each year, as I'm sure that you can imagine, and making yourself unique and making yourself stand out is a very good way of showing us what is behind those academic scores, what is behind your choice of degree. So if your personality can come through in that second essay, that can be a very compelling use of that material. Some people use it to address a slightly lower GMAT than they had hoped. Some people use it to address a slightly lower GPA than they had hoped for. That's fine if that's your choice. That is completely okay. There is no wrong thing to write about in that second essay. What I would stress, though, is that can sometimes be a bit of a missed opportunity if you address an academic score. I feel personally as though that second essay should be used to embellish your character. Tell us something that we don't know about you. Tell us something that you're passionate about, or a hobby, or a society that you join, or something that has happened in your life that is now driving you to succeed, or is the motivation behind you wanting to do the career that you're looking to do. Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm sitting here nodding away. I absolutely agree with Liam's advice there. The second essay, it's there, it's an opportunity, use it. Now we ask in a different section of the application, for example, for you to upload your CV or resume, but we ask you to make sure that doesn't exceed 1 page. And you might mention something in your CV just in passing because of that page limit that you really want to expand upon, to tell us a little bit more about that tiny thing that you mentioned on your CV, but actually might turn into a really, really interesting aspect of your application. Second essay is a really good place where you can do that.
And just something on the first essay, as a school, we have a strong focus on social responsibility. We look at the MBA both through being excellent at the fundamentals of business, but also with a bit of a lens of social responsibility and how you can create positive social change in your future as a leader. Because of that, I think some people assume that we want a first essay on the statistic or trend about a global social challenge that we as a human race are facing. And again, what I would say would be more compelling in that first essay is write something that you are knowledgeable about. It can be any trend at all that you have come across in your personal or professional life. If you can link it to your career to date, or even better, your career goals and how you would use the MBA to address that in your future career, that for me is a much better essay than writing about something such as global change or renewable energy or fresh drinking water, unless those are areas that you've come across in your professional life and are continuing to do so once you've graduated. Then that obviously makes perfect sense for you as an individual. But if you're not touching upon those areas, or you haven't in your previous work experience, writing about those areas in that first essay can create a little bit of a disconnect from the theme that you should be trying to get across in your overall application. Moving on to the references. Actually, before we do that, there was a question just briefly about the professional experience. I'm going to go back to it because it was a very good question. The question was the 2 years minimum requirement. Does that have to be for an established company, or can it be working for yourself or working for your own company? Of course it can. If you've set up your own business and you've been running that for the past few years, that will absolutely count towards your 2 years minimum professional experience. Thank you very much for the question. So references, just quickly, we need 2 of these. It can be 1 academic, 1 professional. It can be 2 of either one of those if you prefer. I think some people will sometimes make the mistake here to think, who is the most senior person that I know within my company? I'll get the CEO to write a letter of recommendation for me because their position will carry some weight. And my piece of advice here is actually going to be, choose the 2 people that know you the best, that can talk about you and your strengths in greater detail. If that happens to be the CEO, then great, use that person for sure. If not, use a peer, use a direct supervisor, use a customer that you've been working with, use a colleague, use a client that you've been working on a project for. Anyone at all that you would think this person can talk about the strength that I would like them to highlight in a compelling and constructive way. And also this person can lend themselves to the themes that I'm trying to get across about myself and my application. So please don't think that seniority automatically makes a better choice. I would say, Charlotte, it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. In terms of the mechanics of reference submission, I know there was a question earlier on about this. So you apply online to the MBA. I'm sure most of you have already created your account and started to explore the online application system. What you need to do is to register your referees, provide all of their contact details. As soon as you submit your referees' details, your referee will then receive an email giving them login credentials for the system so they can be working away on their letter of recommendation to support your application in parallel with you furnishing the answers to the rest of your application. So I think a really top tip is to think about registering your referees quite early on in the process. Also, respect your referees' time. It's really, really disappointing for us in the admissions team to see a really strong application sitting there, but it's incomplete because of missing references. Everything else looks really glowing, but we can't take your application forward until it's complete. So I think with that in mind, given that your referees are busy people like you, register them early. That gives them plenty of notice to register, log in, start to work on your letter of recommendation. Make sure you've had a conversation with them before you register them as well. That's just polite, that's just courteous, so that they then won't be surprised when they get this email from Oxford asking them to support your MBA application. So that's something I think that you need to be just mindful of in terms of thinking through who is going to be your referee. So yeah, get them registered early, they can be working, give them plenty of lead time, and then when the application deadline rolls around, your referees will have submitted their recommendation and everything will be in place.
We've had a few questions come in about letters of recommendation. One of them is, can we have more than two? Officially, no. The system will only ask you for two email addresses, two contact details that we would then obviously contact and get that reference from. If you have met some alumni, if you have met myself or any of the recruitment team on the road and you think that they might be able to email us and let us know what their thoughts are of you, then unofficially we can read that. It will not be accepted as a letter of reference in terms of the official definition, but it can be used to help make a decision in terms of the application. So if you've reached out and connected with any of the existing students or the alumni or the faculty, and they write to the admissions team at the time of your application to give their thoughts, we will definitely take it into consideration. But officially, no. Two letters of recommendation is the maximum that you can submit. We had a question, is it okay to have a reference from a subordinate? Yes, that's absolutely fine. There's no reason at all. I would say we would always need a professional email address rather than like a Google Mail or a yahoo.co.uk example email address. Just so we know that it's going to a professional person rather than an email address that could be essentially anybody at the other end of that. And I know Charlotte has a point to make here, so I'll pass over to her.
Yeah, the point here is about family businesses. We do not want references from family members. And I know that for those of you in that situation, that can be really, really tricky. But we would just prefer that your referees do not have a family relationship to you as a candidate. It puts them in a difficult position as well, potentially. So I think here is where you can be more creative. And that might be a subordinate, as this question asker is considering, or it could be a client. So I think thinking around your situation, if you are in a family business, is certainly worthwhile. There's another question here saying, can the candidate submit a recommendation and upload it into the portal? No, your references should be entirely confidential. So you register your referees and they upload their letter of recommendation.
And just a final couple of questions. For example, somebody who is just finishing their master's degree, can a professor be a reference? Yes, absolutely. It doesn't have to be somebody that has seen you be a leader in the business world. It can be academic. There's no problem at all with that. And one final one regarding academic references, if they've already retired and they only have a personal email address, that is okay. There are steps that we can take here at the school to verify that that person is who we think they are. So if that's your situation, that's okay. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think what would be really useful here, if you are in a situation where one of your referees absolutely has to use a personal email address rather than an institutional or a professional email address because they've retired, for example, if you give us a heads up first, so we'll be reaching out to everyone that's attended the webinar by email. So that's a good opportunity for you to get in touch with the recruitment managers here to alert us to your impending application and to explain the situation regarding that particular referee. Then at least you're on our radar, and we won't, for example, negate that reference when it comes through as being invalid because of the address, because it's almost, we know about it, so it's like pre-authorization, if you will.
And then moving on to the final section in the application requirements slide, it's the English language proficiency. Charlotte always words this infinitely better than I can, so I'll hand it over to her to describe when is this needed and when is it not.
So no pressure then, thanks Liam. Okay, so if you are a national of a non-majority English speaking country, then you may have to provide evidence that you meet Oxford University's proficiency standards in English. Having said that, there are a few scenarios under which we can waive that requirement. So I'm thinking here, a good example would be someone from India. It's not officially, according to the UK Home Office, a majority English speaking country, but education, particularly tertiary level education in India, is almost always conducted entirely in English. So chances are, if you are from India and you did your degree in India, you will have been taught exclusively in English. So you will fall into a happy situation whereby we can waive the need for you to submit the results of a TOEFL or an IELTS. The evidence that we need in order for that waiver to apply will be either a letter from your institution confirming the language of instruction for your degree, and it must confirm that your degree was taught in English throughout, or alternatively, you will have to upload your degree transcript as part of your MBA application anyway. But if you check your transcript, sometimes the language of instruction can be found on there, sometimes on the reverse, actually in the key, rather than on the front page. So any official documentary evidence of the fact that your degree was taught entirely in English can help you with that waiver requirement. Alternatively, if you are from a country that isn't English majority speaking, but you attended a university in a different country for your undergraduate degree and thereby was taught entirely in English. So let's say, for example, you are Chilean. Okay, so you're from Chile, but you came to the UK to do your bachelor's degree, just as an example. When you upload your transcripts and your details of your degree, it's clear to us that you were educated in the UK at tertiary level. Therefore, if you've completed a full degree in the UK, we will again apply a waiver when it comes to English language proficiency. For those of you who find yourself unable to be considered for a waiver, you will need to submit the results of either a TOEFL or an IELTS test. Now, that test needs to have been taken within 2 years of you making your MBA application, and you need to meet our minimum score thresholds. Full details are on our website, and as well as the overall score that you need to meet, you also need to hit component scores for listening, reading, writing and speaking. Now, these are scores that are required by Oxford University centrally. So the school, being an academic department that's part of Oxford University, we have to fall in line with that requirement. So you will need to make sure that your MBA application is supported by an English proficiency test result that's valid and meets our minimum standards.
We had a question, Charlotte, that came through about studying overseas for a semester in an English-speaking institution.
Really
does
good
that
question.
count for the waiver?
Yeah, really good question, and quite a common scenario. Unfortunately not. No, you need to have completed your entire degree in English or completed your entire degree in an English majority speaking country. So you need to have done your degree in, for example, in the US or in the UK or in Australia, or alternatively, your degree needs to have been taught overseas, but exclusively in English, and you need to be able to provide documentary proof that that's the fact. So things like an exchange semester, or if your degree was taught partially in English, then no, a waiver is not going to apply to you, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on, guys. That was the slide that showed the basic minimum requirements. This slide shows a little bit about how you can strengthen the application for things that we value. We don't necessarily explicitly state that we look for on our website. So we're just going to run through this relatively quickly. Leadership, again, it doesn't have to be a leader of people or manager of people, but have you led on a project? Have you thought of ideas that have been taken on by your company? Have you shown any leadership growth and leadership potential in your career so far? Communication and teamwork, I'm going to kind of talk about together. They're very important aspects of the kind of personality that we look for in an applicant. And it's probably best at this point to talk about the application process in two relatively distinct stages. The previous slide and the application materials that you'll submit will be what we'll use to ascertain whether we would like to offer you an interview. And then during your interview, it's much more your self-awareness, which is on this slide you can see in front of you, your emotional intelligence, your personality that we'll use alongside all of your application materials to decide whether or not we want to make you a place of an offer on the course. So the way you communicate, the way you work in a team, we'll actually probably ask you quite explicitly in your interview some examples of how you've done this in your working life or your personal life so far. This section of a person's application is very important to us. We do a good amount of group work in the MBA here, and so testing and understanding how you would integrate and collaborate with that group and with the wider cohort as well is a very important part of your application and part of the interview process that you'll come across for sure in that application window. Career vision is probably one of the most important things in your application, and I mentioned before about how the GMAT score or the GPA on its own probably would not make or break your application. Your career goals and your career vision is something that we would test very strongly before we make a decision, both for interview and also for a place on the course. And what we're talking about here is, does the idea of a one-year MBA fit alongside your current work experience with the goal that you're trying to achieve in your career once you've graduated? We're a one-year program, as most people would probably know already. What that means is the time you're with us is obviously condensed versus a traditional two-year MBA program. If you're looking to make a drastic change in your career, both in terms of geography, do you want to work overseas? Do you want to change your industry? Do you want to change the sector or even the job role within that sector? If you're looking to change several of these areas all at once, we would examine very closely your experience so far and how we think a one-year MBA here at Oxford can help you achieve those goals. It's in no one's best interests for you to struggle to find the job that you want and that you deserve when you graduate. It's not good for you as an individual, and selfishly, it's not good for us as a business school. So if we think you're being a little bit too ambitious with your career goal based on what a one-year MBA can give you, based on your career experience so far, if we think you're trying to make too much of a change, that could be an obstacle on the path to being offered a place on the course. My advice here is when you're answering those career questions in the application form, and they're very lengthy questions, there's not really a maximum word count, so you can go into a lot of detail here, is ask yourself the question in the back of your mind, how does this look to a business school that are very concerned with getting me the job that I want and that I deserve? And is it too ambitious? Is it the right mixture of aspirational, because it is your career and it should be, but also with a healthy dose of realism in there as well? If we think that it's unobtainable or a little bit too beyond your reach, then that could be a stumbling block. We will give you plenty of space in the application to talk about maybe a plan B. So you can have a very aspirational goal in your plan A, and then maybe a fallback option, which could be something along the lines of returning to the company you work for now while you continue to work on plan A over the coming years. So plan A and plan B, think about what they look like and think about in the back of your mind, how does this look to Oxford as I read through my application? Does it make sense? Does it seem achievable? Am I aiming at the right level based on what I can get from my career experience and a one-year MBA added together? Charlotte, anything more on that subject?
I think that's really, really true. As Liam has said, it's a one-year program, and I think this is where you need to take a healthy reality check. And that section around career development, it's a very reflective exercise. It really is your chance to sit down and think about what an MBA can deliver to you, what you can deliver via an MBA experience, and whether the transition that you're trying to bring about is really realistic, given that this is a 1 year, super busy, very intensive program, and here you are at point A and you're wanting to leave the program heading towards B, which is your career goal. Is this really realistic? Is this something that people in your network have already achieved? You know, are you plugged into a network of fellow professionals who have already affected the kind of transition that you're wanting to bring about? Because as well as having a business school experience, I think at interview we certainly have conversations about your professional network, and you can prove to us that you know that your goal is very realistic and achievable because of the research you've done and because of the network that you're plugged into. You know, think about people that have got the kind of job you want. How did that come about? What does their profile look like? How do you measure up against that individual? So I think really it's your opportunity to prove to us that you've really done your homework, got your head screwed on right, and that what you're trying to achieve is as Liam said, it's stretching. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but it is achievable.
And that feeds into that final point on this slide about awareness. You know, we do look for people to understand what their strengths are and have the confidence to talk about those, absolutely. But at the same time, everyone has areas that they can develop. And so talking to us about what those are, how you can think the Oxford MBA can help you develop those areas, what you can bring to the cohort, but also what can you learn from your peers and from the faculty, then that's a really big part as well, along with what Charlotte was saying about that reality check in your career that all forms that second part of your application about you as an individual, you as a personality type, and you as being an engaging and collaborative member of the cohort that we're trying to build here in the school. So just briefly, the application windows for a September 2019 intake are on the screen. Stage 1 is coming up relatively quickly, as you can see. Stage 2, 3 and 4 are spread out over the next 10 months or so. We had a question earlier on that I was going to get to on this slide, so I'll go back to it now. It was about, are there any preferences or any benefits about applying early? Well, my overall piece of advice here would be apply when you feel you're ready. It's an Oxford application. As I mentioned before, it's a competitive program to get into. I think you should take as much time as you feel as though you need to put your best self forward. If that is missing September and missing November and applying in January, if that's right for you and your timelines, that is the right thing to do. Having said that, there are some benefits probably to applying in the earlier stages. We're not really talking about scholarships on this presentation today, but the scholarships are given out very early on in the year, or they're begun to be given out very early on in the year. And so if you're applying in September, then the scholarships are all still yet to be given out. And so you might be amongst the first in line for some form of funding or some form of scholarship in that window. Charlotte?
Yeah, I'll just come in there. As you can see, there's the application deadline, September, November, January and April. I think apply early if you're in a good, strong position to do so is great. Clearly then you're going to know quite early on whether you are coming to Oxford to do your MBA next year, which is a great position to be in. If you are interested in scholarship funding, as Liam said, we will be making scholarship awards for monies that are controlled exclusively by the school in the September and November rounds. But of course, Oxford University as an institution also has scholarship competitions that you will automatically be entered for should you fit the relevant eligibility criteria. The cut-off date for those Oxford scholarships is the January deadline, January 11th. So I think if you want to cast your net as wide as possible when it comes to funding opportunities, be in either stage 1, stage 2 or stage 3. If you are leaving your application until stage 4, you will not be considered for any Oxford University scholarships. The school might still have some monies available, but I think to really sort of cast your net wide, as I say, stage 1, 2 or 3 is where you really need to be. And those deadlines, they're hard deadlines. Your application needs to be complete when the deadline passes if you want to guarantee that your application is going to go forward for consideration by the admissions committee.
What I would say with regards to applying early and other associated benefits, it makes very little difference in terms of your chance of being offered a place in the course, except possibly stage 4 as the class begins to get maybe a little bit more full. Generally speaking, we interview the same percentage of applications each window. We generally offer whenever we have strong candidates come in, and so there isn't more chance of being interviewed in stage 1 versus stage 2 or stage 3. There isn't more chance of being offered a place in any of the earlier stages, except for that April window, which might be where only a few remaining places on the course are left to fill, which would then naturally make it maybe a little bit more competitive. Charlotte.
A couple of questions that have come in that are relevant here. One question is about whether we operate rolling admissions here, so whether your application is going to be assessed when you submit it, or whether we gather them all together. Well, we gather them all together once the stage deadline has passed. So the committee will meet and look at everyone's application that has become complete since the last application deadline. So it's a competitive process where you're going head to head with all of the other candidates. Having said that, it really doesn't make much difference in terms of your likelihood of admission in those first 3 stages. Stage 4, yeah, it is going to become more competitive. There's another question here about interview notification dates and final decision dates. If you head on over to our website, you'll see that there is a full schedule published there, but very roughly, if you submit your application and it's complete when the deadline passes, for most of the stages, the committee will then have maybe say 3 weeks or so to consider applications and draw up a shortlist. We will then let you know if we want to call you for interview, and that interview might be here at Oxford. We might have committee members or senior members of school staff in other global cities, in which case we'll let you know what those locations are if that's an option for you. Alternatively, we might offer an interview via Skype. So those interviews will unfold over another, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks, and then you will receive your final decision as to whether we're going to make you an offer of admission or not. But like I say, if you have a look at our website, there is a full schedule there.
And so moving on to the final slides now, we think about next steps. So what can you do to get in touch, to speak to us about your interest, to start the process? We do have a way that you can introduce yourself to us on the website. You can drop us an email with your CV, and there's some email addresses and contact details on the next slide. Download one of our brochures. If you haven't yet taken the GMAT or GRE, think about doing that as soon as you can. We had a question earlier that I didn't address at the time, but I'm going to answer now, which is, which one of those application requirements do you think should take priority? I would say in terms of number of hours of preparation, GMAT and GRE, to study for that and to prepare for that, and maybe to take it once or maybe twice to make sure you get the score that you want. That is probably the biggest piece of work in terms of preparing things for your application. As Charlotte mentioned before, you can put your referee's details in there, then the process will be automatic for you. The essays are important, but they're not hugely long in terms of word count. I think the most important aspect in terms of time consuming is the preparation for the GMAT and GRE. Come see us. We have a number of open days at the school here in Oxford. We have one a week tomorrow, actually, next Friday. So if you're looking to come and see us and you're in the region, definitely drop in. We do have unofficial days where you can kind of get in touch and arrange your viewing. Please do get in touch with either a recruitment manager or somebody from the admissions team to see if we're available to meet with you on that day. We don't really have a drop-in system where you can just come in and ask to speak to somebody, because our schedules can often be quite tight, or we're traveling or on business trips overseas. And so please do get in touch beforehand if you want to come in and see us outside of those official open days.
I'm going to come back to a question here that I apologise. I know you had to ask this twice and we didn't speak to it at the time, and it's about second essay and how academic it needs to be in terms of citations, quotations and so on. The second essay isn't an academic essay. The second essay is, what more would you like the admissions committee to know about you? So that really is just a piece of prose. First essay is about the trend or statistic that shocks you and how would you change it for the better. If you're thinking here about the word count, it's 500 words, but that's exclusive of any sources that you're going to be quoting or citations that you're going to be listing. So that's just for your body copy.
Just quickly on the open day for next week, folks, I've just been informed that we might be at capacity for next week, but we do have another one in November, and there will be events happening throughout the autumn. So please do just keep an eye on the events page on the website, and you'll be able to sign up for one that isn't at capacity. Charlotte.
Another question here. In fact, a couple of people have asked the same question, and it's about the CV, both really struggling to condense their extensive experience down to just one side of A4. Well, I'm afraid it does need to be one side of A4. Let's put it this way. However senior you are and how many years of experience you have, and this might be 20 years if you're one of our executive program participants, one of the first exercises that our careers team would do with you in the program is to make you create a one-page CV. So we think this is a really great exercise for our MBA candidates to undertake prior to being admitted to the program. So you will need to condense it down. There is actually a template that's available on the application system that shows you the kind of content on a CV that we think is relevant. So it could be, for example, that you are adding in a photograph or whatever the custom might be for you at present. But if you have a look at our template CV, you'll see the contents that we feel are the most important for you to present. But believe me, everyone can get their CV down to one page.
And just on that as well, we had a question about how internships don't really count towards the 2-year full-time work experience requirement. Do we want to see those and hear about those in the application? Absolutely, yes. We would love to hear about all the work experience you've had, whether it be paid, internship, part-time, voluntary, all of it. And if it can fit onto your one-page CV, put it on there as well. But the internships themselves won't count towards that 2-year requirement.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the work experience requirement, this is not a numbers game. This is not scraping together, a few months here and a few months here and a few months here to make it a magical 2 years. We really are looking for solidity when it comes to your experience and progression. So 2 years is really the absolute minimum. But you may well have undertaken all kinds of internships as well as paid work that you might not have room to tell us about on your CV. So SA2 is a great place to speak to this. And I think, you very well might have interned at a company where the experience taught you a lot more than perhaps your paid work has done. So that essay, second essay, is a really great place for you to just tell us a little bit more about that.
And so finally, folks, if you want to get in touch, my email address is on the screen. We have a general MBA recruitment team email address as well. For people out there that are in the Americas, North and South America, I would be your point of contact. So please feel free to email me. I'm happy to hear from anyone, and I can forward you on to the relevant recruitment manager or admissions contact once you've made your application that would be in your region. So please feel free to email me no matter where you are. We're going to take some questions. That's the end of the presentation. There's one that I want to start with because it comes up relatively often, and it's one for Charlotte. The question is, does Oxford require the official GMAT score before application deadline, or is an unofficial score acceptable?
Yeah, really, really good question. So on the day that you take your GMAT, and I'm talking here just about the GMAT, not the GRE, but on the day that you sit for your GMAT, you will receive what is called your test taker's copy of your unofficial score. So it's a PDF document that you get to keep a copy of. Now that is the document that you're going to need to upload to your application. You'll see in our application form, there's one section where you will see a bunch of fields where you can populate your scores, and you can physically type in, 90th percentile and 760 and so on. But there's a separate part of the application form that you will get to once you've submitted your application, where you will then upload your copy of your GMAT results, and we do need you to upload that, please. Now for the GRE, you don't get unofficial scores on the day. They're usually made available to you about a week or 10 days after. Now, given that we do need you to upload your unofficial GRE scores, if you are planning in test dates, bear that in mind. Think about your test date and think about the MBA application deadline, because you will have to upload your copy of your provisional test results as a document, not just typing in the numbers, in order for your application to be deemed complete.
We've had a question come in about if you're successful in an application, are you able to defer your place until the following academic year, Charlotte?
Yep, happy to take that question. With a deferral, Oxford University very occasionally grants deferrals, but it is quite strict upon the grounds that a deferral can be sought and considered. If you make an application and something happens to you once you've received your offer of admission, and I'm thinking here, for example, diagnosis of serious illness or something happening to a family member, and you can no longer attend the MBA, then in a situation like that, we would invite you to tell us about it, and we would give due consideration to deferring your place. But you should not make an MBA application with thoughts in your mind about possibly deferring. If you're making an application to the MBA program, you should really only do that if you've got the full intention of coming next September. You shouldn't be even thinking about deferral as an opportunity at this stage. If that's the situation, then you're not really in a good place to make an MBA application right now. Like I say, if something happens to you that's unforeseen after you've been admitted to the program, then we will try where we can to be supportive and potentially offer a deferral. But really, you shouldn't be thinking about possibly deferring your place already. We'd much rather you just wait a year and apply when you're really ready to commit.
We've had a few questions come through about other webinars or future sessions, and do we have any sessions that can discuss post-MBA career stats and those kind of things? Charlotte was going to take this one for me.
I will. Not necessarily post-MBA career stats, but what I would say, and I'm just advertising myself here for a moment, if you will permit me, is if you make an application to the program and it is successful, then after we make our offers each stage, I host a webinar, and in that admits webinar, I run through some of the next steps. So how do you secure your place? Do you have to pay a deposit? If so, when, how? What's the Oxford collegiate system? What's a college? Is that where I live, or is that just something I'm a member of? What does that mean? Where will I live if I'm an Oxford student? So all of this will unfold for you once you're admitted to the programme. Outside of admissions, yes, once you're an admit, there are a whole host of different webinars that take place from time to time, and some of those have a careers focus. They might have a specific sector focus. We quite often run webinars with members of the current class. They might come in and chat to you about how they're getting on here in Oxford so far, anything that they want to pass on in terms of tips and wisdom. It might be a webinar that features students from one particular geographic region, or it might just be a cross section. It might have a specific focus with regards to women who are entering leadership in the MBA program, for example. So yeah, there's a whole host of different webinars that you'll be able to attend if you make your application and it's successful.
And before that application is submitted, we do have general online information session webinars. There's one happening a week today, next Thursday. It's a little earlier in the day, UK time. It's in the morning. It's being hosted by my colleague, Amy. That will talk a little bit more about the class profile in a bit more depth, about the curriculum, how the year is set out in terms of the semesters and what you might study in which part of the year, and also look at the career outcomes of the most recent class and the support that the careers team can give you. So if you head to our website, again on the events page, you'll be able to see that webinar. You can sign up and register for that, and that will also be recorded and sent out to people that can register but then aren't able to make it on the day. So if you think the time zone doesn't quite work for you, I would recommend you register anyway, because then you'll be on the mailing list for the recording once we have finished that webinar that my colleague Amy is running. We have just time for maybe one or two more questions. We've had a question, I think maybe Charlotte, for you. Does the number of GMAT attempts matter in an overall application?
Yeah, good question. And I think we touched upon this earlier when Liam was saying that your GMAT result, it is quite an, it's an important part of your application. There's no getting away from that, even though there are other aspects that we will be paying attention to. And you need to show us your very best self when it comes to your standardized test results. Now, if you've never taken a GMAT before, it could be that you, even with all the revision, you take a test and you're quite disappointed with that first score. You know that it doesn't truly reflect your ability, so you retake. And having been through that experience, you then have a much better feel for how the questions are structured. You might have a better handle on how to manage your time during the test, for example. So you would normally see quite significant uplift between test attempts. There is no limit. We do not view multiple test attempts negatively. We normally see test results that are showing an upward trend. the number of times you take the test, you will normally see an upward trend, and then perhaps you will start to plateau, and that would be indicative of the fact that you really are then showing your best self. So that certainly wouldn't count against you.
Okay, I think that's probably all we have time for, guys. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your attention over the last hour. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of your questions. Please do send those through on an email, either to myself or to the MBA recruitment team. We'll definitely get back to you with some answers over the next day or so. Keep an eye on the events page, look out for more webinars and more events that you can come to in Oxford in person. We'll almost definitely be in your area over the next few months as we conduct those trips into those markets. Start your application. If you have any questions, by all means, get in touch and reach out to us at any time. Thank you again for attending today.
Thanks very much, and good luck with your application.